Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for that warm welcome. Mr. Speaker, I'm asked for the opportunity to speak on Bill C-2 today because it's one of those pieces of legislation that I think has to be called out, has to be exposed. We have to tell the Canadian people really what's going on in the Parliament of Canada and what's driving and motivating the type of legislation being put forward by the Conservative Party, the ruling party. And I should say at the outset that Bill C-2, this bill that is supposedly titled An Act to Amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, it should really be called an act to raise money through fear-mongering acts, because within hours of Bill C-2 being tabled in the House of Commons, a blitz, a flurry of fundraising letters went out across the country under the title, Keep Heroin Out of Our Backyards. Now, imagine the cynicism to introduce legislation that's not based on evidence, reason, logic, science, public health. None of those factors enter into this whatsoever. The fact is the Conservatives are running out of red meat to throw to their base. They don't have the gun registry to milk anymore. I don't know. I'm amazed they killed the goose that laid the golden egg on the gun registry. That used to be how they bankrolled the whole darn party, really, their war room and everything. They don't have that. They don't have the – and the honourable member across, yes, is probably wanting to say we don't have the Canadian Wheat Board anymore to slap around. No, they can't milk that one anymore either. That was a good one. They milked that one for years, calling marketing freedom the freedom to sell your grain for less. I always called it. We should label these bills a little more honestly, really. I'd like us to keep heroin out of our backyards fundraising campaign started hours. Sometimes the same minute that the bill is tabled, the fundraising letters start blitzing out. It makes you wonder who's paying for some of the mailings, because I know a lot of this messaging is in fact paid for by the taxpayer. In my own riding, 10 Conservative members of Parliament have been carpet bombing my riding with their propaganda and their literature, followed up immediately with a fundraising letter from the party. You see, so they plant the idea, they plant the seed on the taxpayer's dime, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of letters coming into my riding on a regular basis, and then they pay for the postage stamp for the follow-up letter, which asks for money based on the taxpayer-funded literature that just arrived. Do you think that's legal? I don't think it is. I think it's an abuse. At the very least, it's an abuse. I mean, when you've got the Prime Minister's office being investigated for high crimes and misdemeanors, I mean, let's summarize some of the abuse of privileges, mailing privileges being one. With the Prime Minister's office being investigated for what? Bribery, breach of trust, fraud, obstruction of justice, and you can add contempt of Parliament to that sorted list. Add abusing the taxpayers' dollars by misusing the mailing privileges of members of Parliament to another one. I digress, though. The substance of the bill I want to speak to in a serious way, Mr. Speaker. I might be one of the few people in the House that's actually toured the Insight safe injection site in Vancouver, although I know quite a few of our NDP members have, in fact. I doubt very many members on the Conservative side ever have, because they wouldn't be able to say with a straight face that there's any evidence in the way that they've been arguing about the keeping heroin out of our backyards fundraising drive. Because first of all, if you did canvass the community of the downtown east side, it's overwhelmingly supported. If you canvassed ordinary Vancouverites, it's overwhelmingly supported. So there is no NIMBY, not in my backyard, associated with Insight. Yet we have a whole piece of legislation which is crafted specifically to undermine the Supreme Court ruling and shut down one public health facility in downtown Vancouver. I mean, talk about another spurious, wasteful use of the taxpayer's dime, to have Parliament seized of the issue to get revenge for them losing a Supreme Court ruling on the veracity and the use and the efficacy of Insight safe injection site in downtown Vancouver. Mr. Speaker, one of the problems lies that the mindset of the Conservatives is that substance abuse and addiction is somehow a criminal justice issue. It's not, Mr. Speaker. It's a health issue, and it should be treated as such, as a public health concern. And one of the other problems that I don't think a lot of these people realize, Mr. Speaker, who have introduced this bill, is that if you're going to help someone who has a substance abuse or addiction problem, you need to reach them, and you need to have the supports available and concentrated when that person is ready. I had an example in my own office recently, Mr. Speaker. My riding is has some serious issues, not unlike the downtown east side of Vancouver. There was a young sex trade worker who works up and down the street of Sargent Avenue, where my office is. One time she came into our office clearly jangled on, we believe, crack cocaine, and wanting to make a change to her life. She said, you know what, I've had it. I want off the streets. I want help. I want to clean up. So we got on the phone to try and help her. We couldn't find a bed for her. We couldn't find any place to refer her. And you can't tell an addict to say, sure, I'm glad you want to clean up. Come back in 6 weeks and we'll have a bed for you. It doesn't work that way. And one of the magic things about Insight is the on-site, which is above, the 8 floors above, are rooms. Clean, safe, detox-assisted rooms where an addict can literally be using the safe injection site on the main floor 1 minute, speak to a counselor or a social worker that very moment, and be referred to a detox center and a dry out and a rehabilitation program in the same building at the same time. And the success rate is evident. The empirical evidence exists that Insight saves lives and Insight helps people get off drugs because we can have access to them to offer the services that they need to clean up their lives. Unlike the young woman in Winnipeg, where there was no room available for her, Insight/on-site/Portland Hotel services are a whole campus of support mechanisms concentrated right there where it's needed. So this fear-mongering, this fundraising campaign about keeping heroin out of our backyards, one of the pieces of literature that they're bombing into my riding, Mr. Speaker, misusing their MPs' mailing privileges, has a picture of a guy sneaking in a bedroom window with a knife, as if this junkie is going to kill you in the night with this knife if you don't vote Conservative, because only we can help protect you from this junkie who's going to creep into your bedroom window. That's how cynical this messaging is, Mr. Speaker. You build up a straw man, and then you try and convince the people that that straw man is going to hurt you, and then you say, I'm the only party that can protect you from this imaginary straw man. This is what they're doing with this legislation. They're trying to imply that if this bill doesn't pass, and if we don't somehow overturn the outcome of that Supreme Court ruling, you're going to have junkies in your backyard shooting up heroin. That's really what the messaging is when you strip it away down to its actual substance. Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court ruling showed great wisdom. It's a shame that it had to go that far, that Insight opened in 2003, started showing improvements immediately. There used to be 12 people a year dying from an overdose in the downtown, lower east side of downtown Vancouver. That's changed dramatically. The communications or the communicable diseases are way down in terms of people using dirty needles, etc., and sharing hepatitis C or even worse, HIV/AIDS. These things are being treated in a common sense approach. The people were supportive. The Supreme Court of Canada is supportive. These guys are sore losers, so they're, again, abusing, I believe, the arbitrary and absolute power that they have by not showing any respect for Parliament to ram this through. At least show some respect for the Supreme Court of Canada that has spoken recently on this subject, Mr. Speaker. Bill C-2 should go down in flames, and they should apologize for that fundraising campaign that they're trying to milk the public by fear-mongering.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Minister of State for Science and Technology.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have actually two questions for the member. The member either knows and is refusing to admit that in my riding I received fundraising letters from the NDP, including the late Jack Layton, that came on government envelopes, obviously paid for by the taxpayers, and I know the member supported that. A blatant misuse of taxpayers' dollars. So my first question is, would he like to see that evidence? Because I've saved it. The second question is, and I'm not sure I totally disagree with the member, but if in fact heroin addiction is a health matter, not something that should be a legislative matter, then why is the member and his party putting forward legislation against salt? Why is the NDP so soft on crime, soft on heroin, and tough on potato chips?
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if my colleague would like to see a copy of some of the literature that his colleagues are bombarding my riding with. Here's one, Mr. Speaker, that's signed by 10 individual members of Parliament, all from Manitoba, who I guess are pooling their mailing privileges, which I thought was something that we did away with in this speaker. I thought the Speaker, in fact, and the Board of Internal Economy prohibits this. But the worst thing about it, and I hope my colleagues listening, the worst thing about it is we believe that they're mining Revenue Canada database to get this information. I'll give you an example. The guy that works in my office received one of these letters in his mother's name. His mother only lived in their house for 4 months before she passed away, and they filed her taxes from that address just once. And guess what? She gets a personalized letter from the Conservative Party to her name at that address. Nobody in the Conservative Party should have known that Mrs. Morrison passed away living on Dominion Street. No one knew she was in that house. It was for her last 4 months that she was alive. How did they find out? Another one, the Tooley family. How did they know when everybody turns 18 that they can change the personalized letter here? Dear Jarrett and Jennifer, Jarrett just turned 18 as a part of this thing. How do they know these things? You see, they're misusing their mailing privileges by bombarding my riding under the signature of Vic Taves and Merv Tweed and 8 others into my riding. The only guy that's ever been convicted of electoral fraud in the Parliament of Canada is writing letters to my constituents on Government of Canada stationery and website, stationery and postage. It's wrong.
Order. If members want to carry on a conversation about this, they can do so outside the chamber. Order, and also remind all honourable members that questions and comments ought to relate to the matter that is before the House. Questions and comments à l'honorable député de Saint-Bruno.
The honourable member for Saint-Bruno-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I carefully listened to the speech, the well-thought-out speech from my colleague of Winnipeg, who really cares about these matters affecting our fellow Canadian citizens. Supervised injection sites have good benefits, and this is known internationally. They are good for communities. Conservatives have launched a campaign, a fundraising campaign based on keeping heroin out of our neighborhoods. But you don't have to be a healthcare professional to understand that Bill C-2 creates many obstacles towards the creation of new supervised injection sites. In fact, this bill would even seek to close Vancouver's supervised injection site. So if that happened, wouldn't heroin appear again in apartment building stairwells and in various places in our communities?
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Well, I want to thank my colleague for her particular insight into this situation. Excuse the pun. I know that as a medical doctor, as a medical practitioner, she has first-hand experience, Mr. Speaker, in observing ways of treating addiction that show results and ways that don't. And we made the distinction early on in the NDP in all of our remarks that addiction and substance abuse is a health issue and should be treated as such, not a criminal justice issue. Even Conrad Black, who usually I don't pay a lot of attention to what he says, when he was serving time in an American prison for his fraud charges, he came out saying, you know what, 80% of the prisoners that I'm in here with don't belong in jail. They belong in a rehabilitation and detox center for their substance abuse issues. That's how they got here. They're not being treated here, and they'll be back in again because their health issues will still be a factor.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Timmins.